Imagine being 6 years old. Imagine that the last thing you remember from your normal life is your mother's hand squeezing yours as you both climb onto a train. Imagine the journey lasting for days with no food, no water, crushed against dozens of bodies in absolute darkness. And when the doors finally open, the light blinds you. Soldiers shout, dogs bark, and within seconds, someone tears your hand out of your mother's. Children to the left, adults to the right. You don't know it yet, but you have just seen your mother for the last time. And your childhood ended the moment you stepped onto the ramp at Auschwitz. More than 1.5 million children were murdered during the Holocaust. 1.5 million. But numbers don't tell the whole story. They don't tell you how those children lived in their final days. They don't tell you what they saw, what they suffered, how some of them, against all logic, against all odds, managed to survive. Today, we are going to enter the darkest and most painful chapter of the Holocaust, the story of the children in the Nazi concentration camps. It is not an easy story to hear, but it is a story that must be told. Because these children had no voice then, and it is up to us to give them one now. Prepare yourself. This is going to be hard, but it is necessary.
The arrival, when childhood dies on the ramp. The train comes to a halt with a metallic screech that cuts through the darkness. You have been traveling for days, perhaps a week. You don't know for sure, because you've lost all sense of time. The cattle car is so tightly packed that you can't sit down. You've been standing for the entire journey, your small body pressed against adults who smell of sweat, fear, urine, and excrement, because there is no toilet. There is nothing except this claustrophobic space where barely any air gets in. Some children have already died during the journey. Their small bodies have collapsed silently, crushed by the weight of the crowd, suffocated by the lack of air, or simply giving up. No one can do anything. There isn't even room for the corpses to fall to the floor. The doors are flung open violently. Raus, raus, schnell! Daylight blinds you after so long in the dark. SS soldiers shout incomprehensible orders. German shepherd dogs bark ferociously, straining at their leashes, showing their teeth. The sound is deafening, terrifying, completely overwhelming. Your mother squeezes your hand in desperation. She tries to keep you close. But there are too many people pushing, too much chaos, too much confusion. And then he appears. A man in a spotless uniform, shiny boots, a kind smile on his face. His name is Josef Mengele, though you don't know that. The prisoners call him the Angel of Death, but you don't know that either. All you see is that he points with his cane, elegantly, almost casually. Left, right, left, right. You don't understand what it means. You don't know that with that simple gesture, he is deciding who will live a few weeks longer and who will die in the next few hours. Children under 14 automatically go to the left. Mothers who refuse to be separated from their children also go to the left. The elderly go to the left. The sick go to the left. Left means the gas chambers. But some children are different. Mengele stops in front of a pair of 8-year-old twins. His eyes light up. "These ones come with me," he orders. The twins don't know that they have just been selected for something worse than immediate death, medical experiments. A 12-year-old girl lies about her age. "I'm 16, she says in a trembling voice. She is tall for her age, and maybe, just maybe, she can pass for older. The SS guard looks at her indifferently and points to the right.
She has survived the first selection. For now. The scenes on the ramp are pure nightmare. Families torn apart in seconds. Babies ripped from their mother's arms. Small children crying, searching for their parents in the crowd. Some scream. Others are too terrified to make a sound. Thomas Björgenthal was 10 years old when he arrived at Auschwitz. Decades later, he recalled that moment. "I saw my mother for the last time on the ramp. An SS officer tore me away from her. She screamed my name. I screamed hers. And then she disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her again." Vera Kriegel was 7 years old. She managed to survive by clinging to her older sister. "We did not let go of each other's hands for even a second," she remembered. "We knew instinctively that if they separated us, we would die. Our mother had told us before she died on the train, 'Don't let go. Never let go.' It was her last gift to us." The children selected to live are taken to the barracks. The path is lined with electrified barbed wire. Giant chimneys spew black smoke and ash that falls like dirty snow over everything. The smell is indescribable. Sweetish, nauseating, penetrating. It is the smell of human flesh burning. The children don't know what that smell is. Not yet. When they reach the barracks, their heads are completely shaved. All their clothes are taken away. They are sprayed with disinfectant. A number is tattooed on their forearm. They are no longer people. They no longer have names. Now they are numbers. Eva Moses Kor was 10 years old when she was tattooed. The pain was terrible, she remembered, but worse than the physical pain was understanding what it meant. I was not a person. I was a number, an object, a thing. Some very small children don't understand what is happening. They cry for their mothers. They ask when they are going home. The older children, those who are 12, 13, 14, understand more. And that knowledge is a terrible burden. The first night in the barracks is impossible to describe. 3-tier wooden bunks where up to 10 people are crammed into a space designed for 3. There are no mattresses, only hard planks. There are no blankets, or if there are, they are full of lice. It is cold. It is always cold. The children cry in the darkness. Some call for their mothers. Others pray. Many simply lie in silence, in shock, unable to process the total and absolute rupture of their reality. Sarah Berkowitz was 9 years old. "The first night in Auschwitz, I cried until I had no tears left," she recalled. "And then I realized something. Crying didn't help. If I wanted to survive, I had to become someone else. I had to stop being a child. That night, my childhood died." And she was right. In the Nazi concentration camps, there was no room for childhood. The children who survived did so because they turned into little adults, with survival instincts sharpened by absolute terror. But what was daily life like for these children? What was it like to wake up every morning not knowing if you would see the sunset? Daily life, surviving in hell. The day begins before dawn. A shrill whistle pierces the icy air. It is 4 in the morning, perhaps 3. There are no clocks. Time has lost all meaning. Appel! Appel! Roll call is mandatory. All prisoners must line up outside in perfect rows to be counted. The weather doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's raining, snowing, or if the cold burns your skin. It doesn't matter if you are sick, weak, or dying. You must stand for roll call. The children stumble out of the barracks, trembling in their striped uniforms that are always either far too big or far too small, never the right size. Some don't even have shoes. They wrap their feet in rags and newspapers to protect them from the frozen ground. Roll call can last for hours, 2 hours, 4 hours, sometimes more. If the numbers don't add up, if someone is missing, if the guards are in a bad mood, the prisoners must remain completely still, standing at attention. For small children, this is torture. Their legs tremble with effort. Some wet themselves because they can't hold it any longer. Others faint. If you fall during roll call, a guard kicks you. If you don't get up quickly, they hit you with a rifle. If you still don't get up, they shoot you on the spot. Michael Bornstein was 4 years old in Auschwitz. Decades later, he remembered, "I didn't understand why we had to stand for so long. My legs hurt. I was so cold. I wanted to sit down, but the older children told me I couldn't, that if I sat down, they would kill me. I learned to fall asleep standing up, like a horse."
After roll call comes breakfast. The word is generous. It is a brown liquid they call coffee, but which is really just hot water with a vaguely bitter taste. Nothing else. No sugar, no milk, no bread. Only that liquid, at least hot, which for a few seconds makes you feel a bit of warmth in your empty stomach. Then the forced labor begins. Children in the concentration camps worked. The Nazis had no regard for their age or fragility. If you could walk, you could work, and if you couldn't work, you were useless. The jobs varied depending on the camp and the child's age. Some were sent to quarries to carry stones that weighed more than they did. They had to go up and down endless stairs carrying those rocks, and if you fell, if you dropped the stone, if you didn't move fast enough, you were brutally beaten. Other children worked in factories. In Auschwitz III Monowitz, part of the Auschwitz complex, there was the IG Farben plant where synthetic rubber was produced. 12 and 13-year-olds worked 12-hour days there in extremely dangerous conditions, handling toxic chemicals with no protection whatsoever. Some children worked in the Sonderkommando, the special units that had to clean the gas chambers after executions. They dragged the corpses to the crematoria. They separated gold teeth. They cut the hair of the dead. It was work that destroyed the soul, but some children did it because members of the Sonderkommando received slightly better food rations. Other jobs included digging ditches, building roads, cleaning latrines, sorting the confiscated belongings of new arrivals. All of it heavy, exhausting labor designed to break body and spirit. Hunger was constant, omnipresent, devouring. Food in the camps was deliberately insufficient. Lunch was a watery soup with some floating piece of rotten vegetable, or, if you were lucky, a small chunk of rancid meat. Dinner was a piece of black bread, hard as stone, sometimes with a tiny piece of margarine or a spoonful of artificial jam. In total, the daily calories were roughly between 700 and 1,000. An active child needs at least 1,800 calories a day. The prisoners received less than half. The result was severe, constant, and progressive malnutrition.
The children became obsessed with food. They dreamed of food. They talked about food. They remembered meals from before the war in painfully precise detail. Some drew pictures of food on stolen scraps of paper. Others invented recipes in their minds, describing step by step how they would prepare a meal if they ever got out. Eva Kor recalled, "Hunger is not just having an empty stomach. It is a constant pain that never leaves you. It is dreaming of food and waking up with your mouth watering. It is watching your friends slowly die of starvation and knowing that you are on the same path. It is thinking about food every second of every day." Disease was rampant. Typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis, pneumonia. Sanitary conditions were non-existent. The latrines were simple holes in the ground where dozens of people with chronic diarrhea tried to relieve themselves at the same time.
There was no toilet paper, no water to wash with. Lice infested everything. If you got sick, you had two options: hide it or go to the camp infirmary. Hiding the illness was dangerous because if you couldn't work, you were selected for the gas chambers. But going to the infirmary was also dangerous because Dr. Mengele and other Nazi doctors frequently carried out selections among the sick. The children quickly learned to pretend they were fine, no matter how they felt. They worked with a 40-degree fever. They concealed infected wounds. They hid symptoms of deadly diseases, because showing weakness was a death sentence.
Violence was constant and arbitrary. SS guards beat prisoners for any reason, or for no reason at all. If you walked too slowly, they beat you. If you looked a guard in the eyes, they beat you. If you didn't look at him when he spoke to you, they also beat you. There was no way to do everything right because the rules changed constantly according to the guards' whims. The capos, prisoners given authority over other prisoners, were often just as cruel or worse. Some capos beat children with particular viciousness, perhaps because venting their own rage and frustration on weaker victims gave them a twisted sense of power. Livia Bitten-Jackson was 13 in Auschwitz. She remembered, "A capo hit me on the head with a stick because I didn't move fast enough. I fell to the ground. I saw stars. I thought he had killed me. But I got up because I knew that if I stayed on the ground, the next blow would be worse." The children also witnessed public executions. The Nazis carried out hangings in the central yard where all prisoners were forced to watch. The victim was hanged slowly, often using a method that caused death by strangulation over several minutes. The guards forced the prisoners to keep their eyes open. If you looked away, they beat you. Can you imagine being 8, 9, 10 years old and being forced to watch someone being killed slowly? To see the body twisting, the face turning purple, the eyes bulging, until finally it becomes still. And to know that you could be next? Some children became emotionally and mentally numb. It was a defense mechanism. If you felt too much, if you let the horror fully touch you, it would destroy you. So they learned not to feel, to look without really seeing, to exist in a state of partial dissociation, where your body is there, but your mind is somewhere distant and safe. Thomas Bergenthal explained it this way: "You become like a zombie. You do what you're told. You eat the little they give you. You work until your body can't anymore. But your mind goes somewhere else. It has to, because if you truly understood where you are and what is happening to you, you would go insane." And yet, even in that hell, there were moments of humanity, small acts of kindness that shone like sparks in absolute darkness. Humanity in hell, how some survived. In Auschwitz, giving your bread ration to another prisoner was not just generosity, it was literal sacrifice. It could mean the difference between your survival and your death, and yet some did it. Female prisoners sometimes adopted orphaned children whose mothers had been killed. With no blood relation, with no benefit to themselves, these women shared their meager food with the children, gave them warmth on cold nights, offered words of comfort when they cried for their mothers. Sarah Naumburg-Pratik, an Auschwitz survivor, wrote about a woman named Mala who cared for several orphaned children in her barrack. Mala had her own family before the war. They had all died. So these children became her family. She sang them lullabies at night. She told them stories. She cleaned their sores with pieces of her own clothing. When she died of typhus, the children mourned her like a mother. The children also protected one another. The older ones looked after the younger ones. They shared survival tricks. How to make your bread ration last longer by breaking it into tiny pieces and eating one every hour instead of all at once. how to look stronger than you really were during selections, how to hide when the Nazi doctors came. In some camps, there were what were called secret schools. Teaching children was strictly forbidden. The Nazis wanted them to remain ignorant, to forget their culture, their language, their identity. But some adult prisoners, especially teachers from before the war, secretly organized lessons. They met in hidden corners of the barracks. They taught in whispers. With no pencils, no paper, no books, the children learned everything by heart. Poetry, history, mathematics, languages. It was incredibly dangerous. If they were discovered, both the teachers and the students would be executed immediately. But they did it anyway, because they understood something fundamental: keeping their minds active, preserving their cultural identity, maintaining the hope that there was a world beyond the barbed wire. That was resistance. Peter Ginz was 14 in the Theresienstadt camp. Despite the terrible conditions, he secretly edited a handmade magazine called Vedem. He wrote articles, drew illustrations, collected contributions from other imprisoned children. The magazine circulated secretly among the children, passed from hand to hand like a precious treasure. Peter was sent to Auschwitz in 1944 and murdered in the gas chambers. But his magazine survived. Today, it is preserved in the Jewish Museum in Prague, a testimony that even in the darkest imaginable place, the human spirit sought light.
The children also found ways to play. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Playing in a death camp? But children have an almost biological need to play. It is how they process the world. It is how they keep their sanity. They played quick, quiet games during brief moments of rest: pebbles, sticks, riddles. Some children made small toys from bits of wire or stolen cloth, an improvised doll, a ball made of rags, invaluable treasures they hid jealously from the guards. Ruth Kluger, who was a child in Auschwitz, wrote, "I found a piece of string. To you it may be nothing. To me it was a treasure. I could play games with that string, jump, make figures with my fingers. For a few minutes, while I played, I was not in Auschwitz. I was somewhere normal, where little girls play with string." Religion was also a refuge for some. Even though religious practices were forbidden, some children prayed in secret. On Jewish holidays, although there was no way to observe them publicly, some prisoners shared religious stories with the children in hushed voices. On Yom Kippur, the holiest fast day in Judaism, some adults insisted on fasting even in the camp, despite being already on the brink of starvation. The rabbi prisoners told them they shouldn't do it, that preserving life was more important than ritual fasting. But some did it anyway, as an act of spiritual resistance. The children witnessed these acts of faith and found in them a kind of anchor, a connection to their identity, their past, the idea that they were more than numbers tattooed on skeletal arms. But perhaps the most important way children survived was by clinging to each other. Siblings who refused to be separated, friends who became family, small groups of children who formed unbreakable bonds. The twins Eva and Miriam Moses saved each other countless times. When Eva was too sick to walk to roll call, Miriam supported her. When Miriam was too weak to work, Eva did the work for both of them. They promised each other they would either survive together or die together, and they kept the first half of that promise. "My sister kept me alive," Eva said decades later, "and I kept her alive. We didn't make it because we were strong or special. We made it because we had a reason to keep fighting. I couldn't give up because if I did, she would die. And she couldn't give up because she knew I needed her. That was our salvation." The children also developed extraordinary resilience, an ability to adapt that surprised even adults. They learned to be invisible when necessary and bold when the circumstances demanded it. They learned to read the guards, to anticipate danger, to calculate risks with an eerie precision for their age. Some children became extraordinarily skilled at stealing food. It was incredibly risky. If you were caught stealing, you were killed. But some developed amazing techniques. They stole potatoes from storerooms. They snatched pieces of bread from the kitchen. They distracted guards while others took something extra. They didn't do it only for themselves. They shared what they stole with smaller or weaker children. There was a sense of community, of "we're in this together," which was the last line of defense against the total dehumanization the Nazis tried to impose. But not all children were able to hold on to their humanity. Some became cruel, fought over food, denounced others to gain favor with the guards. The concentration camp brought out the best and the worst in people, regardless of their age. And then there were the children who were subjected to horrors that went beyond the normal suffering of camp life. Children who were selected for something worse than a quick death in the gas chambers. Children who fell into the hands of Josef Mengele. Mengele's experiments, when science becomes a nightmare. Josef Mengele was a doctor, a trained physician. He held a doctorate in anthropology and another in medicine. He was educated, well-dressed, with refined manners. Sometimes he whistled opera melodies while he carried out selections on the ramp. And he was an absolute monster. Mengele was obsessed with genetics, particularly twins. He believed that by studying twins, he could discover secrets of heredity that would make it possible to create the perfect Aryan race. To him, the prisoners were not people. They were laboratory material, specimens, things. When twins arrived at Auschwitz, Mengele separated them immediately. Twin children did not go to the gas chambers. They had a different fate, and, in many ways, a worse one. Eva and Miriam Moses were 10 years old when they arrived at Auschwitz. They were identical twins. Mengele saw them on the ramp, and his eyes lit up. "Zwillinge! Twins!" he shouted. The sisters were separated from their mother and taken to special barracks. "At first, we thought we were lucky," Eva recalled. "We were given better food than other prisoners. We had our own bunks. We didn't have to work. We didn't understand why they were treating us better." And then the experiments began. Mengele's experiments had no real scientific methodology. There were no ethical protocols. There was no anesthesia. No consent, obviously. It was torture disguised as research. The twins were injected with diseases to see how they would react. So much blood was drawn from them that some children fainted. Chemicals were injected directly into their eyes in attempts to change the color of their irises. They were subjected to experimental surgeries with no medical necessity. Eva Moses was injected with some kind of bacteria or virus. She never found out exactly what it was. She developed a very high fever, hallucinations. She lost consciousness repeatedly. Mengele regularly visited the barrack to check on her progress. I heard him say to a nurse, "It's a shame, so young. She has only 2 weeks to live," Eva remembered. And at that moment, even delirious with fever, I made a decision. I was not going to die. I was not going to give him that satisfaction. I clung to life out of pure anger. While Eva fought the infection, Mengele carried out parallel experiments on Miriam. The idea was to compare how both twins responded to different treatments. If Eva died from the disease, Mengele would likely have killed Miriam as well, to conduct comparative autopsies on their organs. This was common practice. Some twins were killed simultaneously, specifically so that Mengele could dissect their bodies and compare them. The children knew this. They lived with the constant terror that any day could be their last. Vera Grossman-Kriegel and her twin sister were subjected to painful experiments in which cerebrospinal fluid was extracted from their spinal columns without anesthesia. The pain was indescribable, Vera recalled. We screamed, we cried, we begged them to stop. Mengele took notes with a completely indifferent expression, as if we were lab rats. Some twins had limbs amputated for no medical reason, simply to see how they healed. Others were surgically sewn together in sick attempts to create artificial Siamese twins. These children suffered massive infections and died in agony. Mengele also experimented on children who had what he considered interesting anomalies. Children with dwarfism, deformities, heterochromia, different colored eyes. A whole family of little people, the Ovitz family, was kept by Mengele as his personal collection. He constantly experimented on them, but did not kill them because he considered them too valuable for his research. After the war, Dr. Miklos Nizli, a Jewish doctor who was forced to work as Mengele's assistant, wrote about what he witnessed. I saw Mengele kill 14 twins in one night. He injected chloroform directly into their hearts. They died within minutes. Then he had their bodies brought to my autopsy table. I worked all night dissecting them according to his instructions. But Mengele was not the only Nazi doctor experimenting on children. In Neuengamme, Dr. Kurt Heismayer injected live tuberculosis bacteria directly into the lungs of 20 Jewish children. They all died. Shortly before the camp was liberated, the children were hanged to eliminate evidence of the experiment. In Ravensbrück, bone grafting experiments were carried out on teenage girls. Their bones were deliberately broken, and then experimental grafts were attempted. The girls were left permanently disabled, if they survived at all. Nazi experiments on children included injections of chemicals directly into the eyes to change their color, exposure to extreme temperatures to study hypothermia, controlled starvation to study the effects of hunger, injection of infectious diseases with no treatment, experimental surgeries with no medical need, removal of organs from live children, blood transfusions between twins to see what would happen, forced sterilization through radiation or surgery. All of this without anesthesia, without regard for pain, without the slightest trace of humanity. What is perhaps most disturbing is that Mengele could be kind to the children when he wasn't torturing them. He gave them chocolate, he smiled at them, he played with them. Some children, especially the younger ones who didn't fully understand what was happening, came to see him as almost a father figure. This psychological manipulation was perhaps as cruel as the physical experiments. The children never knew when kind Mengele would turn into Mengele the torturer. Eva Kor explained it this way. It was like having two completely different people in the same body. He could give you a candy in the morning and order your execution in the afternoon. That unpredictability was terrifying. You never knew what to expect. Of the approximately 3,000 twins who passed through Mengele's hands, fewer than 200 survived. The rest died either directly from the experiments, from later complications, or were killed when they were no longer useful for research. After the war, Mengele escaped. He fled to South America, where he lived under false identities for decades. He died by drowning in Brazil in 1979, never having faced justice for his crimes. But the children who survived his experiments carried the scars, physical, emotional, psychological, for the rest of their lives. Many had chronic health problems, a direct result of what had been done to them. Others struggled with severe psychological trauma, recurring nightmares, anxiety, depression. Eva Moses Kor devoted her life to speaking about her experience. She traveled the world giving lectures, writing books, educating new generations about the horrors of the Holocaust. In 1995, she did something extraordinary.
She publicly forgave the Nazis, including Mengele. "I didn't forgive them for their sake," she explained. "I did it for me, because carrying that hatred and anger was consuming me. Forgiveness does not mean that what they did was okay. It means I chose to be free from the power they had over me." Her decision was controversial. Many survivors felt it was impossible to forgive the unforgivable. But Eva maintained that every survivor must find their own way to heal. She died in 2019 at the age of 85. Until her final days, she continued to educate people about the Holocaust, sharing her story, making sure the world never forgot what was done to children in the Nazi concentration camps. But the medical experiments were only one form of specific suffering. There were other ways in which children were tortured and killed in the camps. And many children never even had a chance to try to survive. The end, liberation, death, and the legacy that must never be forgotten. January 27, 1945, the Soviet Red Army reaches Auschwitz. The soldiers are not prepared for what they are about to find. Among the approximately 7,000 prisoners still in the camp, there are some children. Very few. Most of the children had been killed months earlier. Those who survived were the ones who had lied about their age, those who had been useful in some way, Mengele's twins, those who had had extraordinary luck. A Soviet soldier, Georgy Elisavetsky, wrote about the first child he saw upon entering Auschwitz. He was a boy of perhaps 8. He was standing alone, trembling, with huge eyes in a skeletal face. He looked at me and asked in Polish, "Are you German?" I told him no, that I was Russian, that I had come to free him. The boy began to cry. He couldn't stop. He just cried and cried. The liberation of the concentration camps should have been a moment of pure joy. And in a sense, it was. The prisoners who had survived against all odds were finally free. But freedom came with a terrible price. Many prisoners were so sick, so malnourished, so close to death that they did not survive the weeks following liberation. Their bodies simply could not recover from the damage they had suffered. Some children died days after being liberated, their devastated bodies finally giving out now that the constant stress of survival had ended. It is one of the cruelest ironies of the Holocaust. Some survived years of horror only to die at the very moment they were finally safe. The Allied doctors who treated the survivors faced enormous challenges. They couldn't feed the starving prisoners normal food because their digestive systems could no longer process it. Some died of refeeding syndrome, a condition in which a body accustomed to extreme starvation cannot handle the sudden influx of nutrients. For the surviving children, liberation meant facing terrible truths. Many discovered that their entire families had been killed. Fathers, mothers, siblings, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, all dead. They were orphans, completely alone in the world. Thomas Bergenthal was 11 when he was liberated. "I didn't know what to do," he recalled. "I had no home to go back to, no family, nothing except the striped uniform I was wearing and the memories I desperately wanted to forget." Some children were adopted by Allied soldiers who took pity on them. Others were sent to orphanages in different countries. Many emigrated to Palestine, later Israel, or to the United States, beginning new lives in unfamiliar lands. Rebuilding a life after the Holocaust was extraordinarily difficult. The surviving children carried massive trauma. Many had constant nightmares, panic attacks, severe anxiety, difficulty trusting others, irrational fears tied to their experiences in the camps. Ruth Kluger, who survived Auschwitz as a child, wrote, "People assume that once you are liberated, everything is fine. But liberation is only the beginning of another kind of struggle. You have to learn to live with the memories. You have to find a way to be a normal person when nothing inside you feels normal. Many child survivors did not talk about their experiences for decades. It was too painful. And in the years immediately after the war, there was a tendency to want to move on rather than relive the past. Some survivors felt that no one really wanted to hear their stories. But over time, many came to understand that they had a responsibility to speak, to bear witness, to ensure that the world knew exactly what had happened. Elie Wiesel, who was 15 when he was liberated from Buchenwald, initially could not write about his experience. 10 years passed before he was able to put his memories into words. The result was Night, a devastating book that has become one of the most important testimonies of the Holocaust.
At first, I thought I could never speak about it, Wiesel wrote. Words seemed inadequate. How can you describe hell in human language? But then I realized that I had to try. For those who died, for those who survived, for the future generations who need to know. The child survivors also face the challenge of explaining their experience to their own children. How do you tell your child about the atrocities you witnessed when you were their age? How do you protect their innocence while honoring the memory of those who were murdered? Some survivors chose not to tell their children anything, trying to protect them from the horror. Others shared everything, feeling it was important that their children understood their family's history. There was no right answer. Eva Kor had 2 children. She told them about her experience in Auschwitz, but adapted the information to their age. I wanted them to know, she explained, but I also wanted them to have a normal childhood, something that was stolen from me. It was a difficult balance. The impact of Holocaust trauma extended even to the following generations. Psychologists have documented what they call transgenerational trauma. The children of survivors often show symptoms of secondary trauma, anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, even without having directly experienced the Holocaust. But in the midst of all this pain, there are also stories of extraordinary resilience. Children who survived hell and built meaningful lives, who became doctors, teachers, artists, activists, who formed families, raised children, found joy despite having known the deepest darkness.
The Moses twins became educators about the Holocaust. Vera Grossman-Kriegel became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping others. Thomas Björgenthal became a judge at the International Court of Justice. They took their suffering and transformed it into purpose. But they never forgot. They could never forget. Today, almost 80 years after the end of the Second World War, there are very few surviving child victims of the Holocaust left. Those who remain are in their 80s and 90s. In 1 or 2 decades, there will be no living direct witnesses. That is why their testimony is more important than ever. That is why museums like Yad Vashem in Israel, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and dozens of others around the world work tirelessly to preserve these stories. Video recordings of survivors telling their experiences, documents, photographs, personal objects, everything is meticulously archived for future generations. Because when there are no living witnesses left, these archives will be all that remains. The number is almost incomprehensible. 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered during the Holocaust. 1.5 million. Each one was a unique individual with dreams, personality, family, a future, all destroyed by an ideology of hatred. Think about that. Think about 1.5 million children. If you tried to say their names out loud, 1 per second, without stopping, it would take you more than 17 days. 17 continuous days of names.
And those are just the children, without counting the 6 million Jewish adults and the millions of others killed by the Nazis. The children who died in the concentration camps never had the chance to grow up, to fall in love, to have families of their own, to contribute to the world. We will never know what they might have achieved. Perhaps among them were future scientists who would have cured diseases, artists who would have created masterpieces, leaders who would have changed the world for the better. All that potential, all that life was systematically annihilated by an industrial killing machine designed specifically to destroy an entire people. And the question that remains, the question that haunts anyone who studies the Holocaust, is: how do we prevent it from happening again? The answer is not simple. It requires constant vigilance against hatred. It requires education about history. It requires the courage to speak out when we see injustice, even when it is uncomfortable to do so. Holocaust survivors have repeated one phrase over and over: never forget, never again. Never forget what happened. Never forget that this occurred in a civilized nation, in the heart of Europe in the 20th century. Never forget that ordinary people allowed it to happen, by participating actively or simply by looking the other way. And never again must we allow hatred to become normalized. Never again must we remain silent when a group is dehumanized. Never again must we think, it can't happen here. The children who suffered in the Nazi concentration camps had no voice at the time. It is up to us, to you, to every person who learns about this history, to give those children the voice they were denied.
When you share their story, you honor them. When you educate others about the Holocaust, you ensure that their suffering was not in vain. When you oppose hatred in all its forms, you fulfill the promise of never again. When you educate others, visit a Holocaust museum if you can. Read survivors' testimonies. Keep this memory alive. And the next time you see hatred in any form, do not stay silent. Because the Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with words, with propaganda, with the gradual dehumanization of a group of people. It began when good people did nothing. Don't be that person.